A professor of international business and public policy, our guest today has contributed hugely to the economic growth of Nigeria and Africa by extension. He's a technocrat of repute and is currently championing a political revolution, a feat he hopes will translate to better living conditions for the average Nigerian. You'll meet our guest after this break. This is the Sunday Interview. I'm Jokeli Jadu. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Our guest today is a political economist, a professor, lawyer, and former United Nations official. He's also a former deputy governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria. He is Professor Kingsley Moghalu, OON. You're welcome to the program.
Thank you.
So let me start like this. Who is Professor Kingsley Moghalu?
Well, Kingsley Moghalu is a Nigerian who is a very normal person, but someone that loves his country very much, somebody that has been very active in public affairs, a family man, is married with 4 beautiful children and a beautiful wife, someone who believes that I believe that my purpose in life is to make the condition of my fellow man better and to make my society better. And that's why I have had such a spirited engagement in public affairs.
What part of your childhood provoked this?
A number of parts. I had a father who was a civil servant. So essentially I grew up my whole young life understanding that my father worked for the government and worked for the public. So therefore, my own associations and the things that I first perceived were always things to do with the public, the country, or the world. My father was a foreign service officer in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the early 1960s. And we lived in Geneva, Switzerland, in Washington, D.C., in the United States, in the years before the Civil War, where my father was posted as a foreign service officer. During the Civil War, we came back to Nigeria, to the eastern region, where I was, where my family was based. And my father was with the government of the eastern region, which later became Biafra. And I learned how to speak Igbo very well, because we were living mostly in the villages as the war was progressing. After the Civil War, he remained in the public service, in the home service, and eventually became a permanent secretary. And one of the things that most affected me about my father was his integrity as a civil servant. My father's favorite boast, he would always beat his chest and say, 35 years as a civil servant, I never took a bribe.
Wow.
And I grew up understanding that a good name was much better than silver and gold. That's the legacy my father left me. I grew up understanding that I had a father who was respected because of his integrity, because of his character. And therefore I grew up understanding that character and integrity as part of it is key.
So away from everything that you do, how do you relax? How do you get away?
Oh, I get away with a number of things. First of all, you know, I am sociable, but I wouldn't consider myself really an extrovert, even though I'm a public figure. So I like spending time with myself, relaxed and just at peace with God and myself. I also like spending time with my family. I like spending time with my wife, with my children, and we relax by watching movies together, having family discussions. Yeah, especially watching movies or television together and just commenting. I also relax by reading light stuff. You know, I'm a professor, so I don't read books for relaxation, except it's a novel, and I haven't read a novel in a very long time. But I read magazines to relax. Yeah.
So seeing that, you know, you grew up outside the country first before coming back to Nigeria, it's easy for you, you know, to not like this country, seeing that for a very long time now, things have not worked. Now, what would you say inspires, you know, your love for Nigeria and your love for wanting to create a change?
Well, you see, I spent my early childhood, which was just a few years. It wasn't really like I spent all my life outside Nigeria. I did primary school in Nigeria, I did secondary school, and I did university
here, because you went to Nsukka, right?
Yes, I went to University of Nigeria.
Nigeria, Nsukka, yeah.
Don't forget that.
University of Nigeria, Nsukka.
Yes, don't forget that. So therefore, one's formation was really in this country. But love of country, it's not about where you are physically. It's about your worldview. And if you're young, it's about how your parents brought you up. For example, I was in the UN for many years, so therefore my kids grew up abroad in different countries, in New York, in Croatia, in Tanzania, in Switzerland, and so on. But all my children love Nigeria, and for them, Nigeria is home. And they're very interested in Nigeria, they're involved in Nigeria, and whenever they finish their school and their studies, they want to make their careers in Nigeria. So it's really about, and that's because I brought them up that way. I made them know that we are Nigerians. You may, you know, have other opportunities, but home is home. Home is Nigeria. Home is Newi, our village, our hometown. You know, that sort of thing. Yeah, so it comes a lot from your family upbringing. Yeah.
All right, so you're a lawyer?
Yes, originally.
And economics?
Yes.
I'm sure the law came first, right?
The law came first. The economics came later.
All right, so what informed your choice of law first as a career?
Yeah. The reason I studied law, I never had in mind that I would practice law in the law courts. It just wasn't in the plan. Okay. My plan from childhood was that I would be two things, either of two things. Either I would be a journalist, a big superstar journalist. I used to love people like Peter Enahoro.
Okay.
You know, I used to love, back in the day, in the 70s, you know, I used to love people like Ralph Wechwe, you know, who was a diplomat and later became a journalist. So I said, it's either I become a big journalist and a big international magazine publisher like these guys, or I would be a lawyer and join the foreign service of Nigeria, like my father did, or an international organization like the United Nations. So I studied law primarily because of my love for international law.
So how did the economics come into play?
Well, the economics came much later, after I'd had a long career in the UN, and then I left. But in the course of that career, my career began to move towards development finance, which was more now about economic development, not about international law and diplomacy. That was the first part of my UN career, which was more traditional. But later on, I was in the Global Fund in Geneva, and we were raising finance. And so development led me, of course, to economic development. That led me to economics and political economy. So, and then I went into risk management as well. Okay. And then, so when I left the UN, I set up my own consulting firm in Geneva. And I was doing that when I was invited back to Nigeria to become deputy governor of the central bank. This is how I got involved in economics, frontally. All
right, now let's talk about your time with the CBN.
Sure.
When you were with the CBN, you led some far-reaching reforms, you know, that had to do with, you know, the economy generally.
Absolutely.
Let me ask you how your work was, how it was with you working in the CBN, saying that, you know, you had worked outside the country, and, you know, I would assume that there would be a difference, you know, working with the UN and then coming back to Nigeria. How did you find that?
Yes, it was an interesting transition, but I'll tell you that it was made easy by the fact that the central bank at the time I was in the central bank was without a doubt the strongest institution in Nigeria.
Okay.
It was very professional. You have a lot of professionals there, a lot of PhDs, so in the public sector in Nigeria, the central bank is easily, far and away, the strongest in terms of human capital. That made the transition very easy because there was a lot of professionalism in the bank. So I just brought maybe a more international flavor in terms of leadership and leadership style. You know, for example, people sometimes when they would joke and say, "Okay, I'm loyal," I said, "Please don't be loyal. Just be efficient and competent. That's what I'm interested in. You know, and be loyal to the institution. You know. So those are just cultural expressions. You know. So, but I found a very capable group of people at the central bank, and we worked as colleagues. You know, with the other deputy governors and with the governor, Sanusi Lamido Sanusi, as he then was. And his leadership, I think, set a very good tone at the time. So yes, it was not a very difficult transition, especially coming back as the deputy governor.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about your time, you know, in the United Nations.
Yes.
You entered, you know, as a UN human rights officer, an election officer, and you rose, you know, to become a director in your own right. In fact, you were one of those who, you know, redesigned the UN internal justice system at the time. Let me ask you what your...
At the level of Under-Secretary General.
Let me ask you what the experience was like, you know, working so closely, you know, with the UN Secretary General at the time, Kofi Annan. What was it like for you?
Well, first of all, I entered the UN in 1992 as a young associate officer, which is entry level. I worked in Cambodia for 1 year as a human rights officer and also as an electoral officer for the elections. Then I was posted to the headquarters, UN headquarters in New York as a political affairs officer. This was when I now began to work directly under Kofi Annan, because Kofi Annan was the Under-Secretary General and the head of the Peacekeeping Operations Department. So I learned, working under him, how to manage different nationalities, different cultures, different ethnic groups in one team. And then the various assignments that I had in the UN, I also learned about building broken nations, rebuilding broken nations, whether it was Somalia, whether it was Rwanda, you know, Croatia, those types of things. And so I've had a lot of experience handling those types of problems. Now, on the question of the redesign of the United Nations system of administration of justice, it was the highlight of my career in the UN because it was a special assignment for 6 months at a very high level, the nominal rank of Under-Secretary General. And I did it with some very distinguished colleagues. We were 5 of us, you know, and we were appointed directly by the Secretary General, Kofi Annan, because the General Assembly said that as part of the management reform of the whole United Nations, we have to redesign the regulatory environment, we have to improve accountability, we have to improve how disputes were settled between the staff and the management of the UN, basically labor disputes, which sometimes involve litigation inside the UN justice system. So we did a total overhaul of the system we found before to a totally new system, which the General Assembly of the United Nations, 190 countries, approved with a lot of praise and adopted it, and it is the system in the United Nations today.
Interesting to know.
Yeah.
Well, we'll go on a short break now. When we come back, we'll still be speaking with political economist, lawyer, and former United Nations official, Professor Kingsley Moghalu. Stay with us. Welcome back. We've spent the last couple of minutes getting into the world of a journalist, professor, and lawyer. He is a former United Nations official, Professor Kingsley Moghalu. Thanks for staying with us.
You're welcome.
All right, so let's talk about your recent book. Build, Innovate, and Grow.
Yes.
Big, right?
Big, yes.
What inspired this book for you? Because I know it's a Nigerian project book.
Yes.
What informed this book for you?
Well, what informed it was that when I finished my 5-year tenure at the central bank as deputy governor, I was appointed a professor at the Fletcher School at Tufts University in Massachusetts. Now, being a professor of practice, I had a lot more flexibility with my time. I now had some distance from Nigeria, so I could reflect a lot based on my experience at the central bank and in the United Nations on what the problems were with Nigeria. But I reflected not on the problems alone, because we all know the problems. I reflected a lot on the solutions to the problems. And this is what led, first of all, to my coming back home in November 2017, setting up the Institute for Governance and Economic Transformation. But while I was doing that, I was also writing big, build, innovate, and grow, my vision for our country. So I think it was a passion for the situation in Nigeria, which in my view has gotten a lot worse than it used to be. And my very strong feeling, how could I contribute to solutions? That's what made me write big.
So being an active member of the polity in the past, what would you say is Nigeria's biggest problem?
Nigeria's biggest problem is that the country has lots and lots of politicians, but no leaders. There's a very big difference between people who are very good at obtaining power from people who actually are leaders that can transform the Nigerian society, that can transform us from poverty, millions of poor Nigerians, into the middle class. That's what has happened in China. That's what's happening in places like Ethiopia or Rwanda. That's what we lack here. And one of the reasons for that is that we don't have a national philosophy that unites all of us as one nation. You know, there are many different ethnic groups in Nigeria, but that's not an excuse. Many nations have been built out of different, ethnicities, and so our diversity can become a strength if we have the right type of leadership that says, don't focus on what makes the Hausa different from the Yoruba, or the Yoruba different from the Igbo, or the Igbo from the Efik or Ibibio. Focus on what unites us. What is our purpose as a country, Nigeria? Where do we want to be in the next 10 years or 15 years? What do we all need to do as citizens to get there?
Let's talk about leadership now. The current administration of President Buhari, obviously a lot of people vested loads of trust in that administration when they took power in 2015.
Yeah, sure.
But apparently, people are disappointed at the slow pace of things. Yeah. What would you say, is what are your thoughts on this leadership, their policies, their economic policies? What are your thoughts?
I think this leadership has been spectacularly incompetent, spectacularly divisive, and spectacularly lacking in vision. The way Nigeria is organized today, we can see that it is us versus them. There is no all of us together. That is one country. No. So you find a pandering towards particular groups that divide the whole country. When a leader or leaders when a government behaves in that way, that government is shirking its responsibility to its citizens. Look again at security. Many people felt that with a military general coming into power, and so on and so forth, security was his strength, we'll become more secure. We have become far more insecure in the last 3 years. There is a tendency to reduce security, or there was a tendency to reduce Nigerian security to Boko Haram, Boko Haram, Boko Haram. Security is multidimensional. You cannot just have such a narrow definition of security. So, of course, it is not surprising that other problems of security have cropped up. The herdsmen roaming around the country, killing people in communities, and no accountability for that. Kidnappers, all over the place. So, the country is in reality approaching a failed state. Then you look at the economy. The economy has collapsed in a spectacular fashion over the last 2-3 years. And the damage that has been done is very huge. We may say that we are technically coming out of recession, but that's just government propaganda. In reality, what is the quality of the life of the citizen? Are you poorer today or richer today than 3-4 years ago? That's the issue that we should be discussing.
Big, you provided solutions to some of the problems we have in this country.
Yes.
But saying that you've mentioned that our biggest problem is leadership.
Yes.
How do we begin to solve this problem?
You cannot solve the leadership problem outside of the political process, because it is the political process that brings up the people who are in political authority. So the process of selecting our leaders has to change. And it's not just a one-sided change. The citizens themselves must become more involved. It's as if the politicians themselves completely control the process of selecting themselves. And they will come to your villages and give you 1,000 naira, 2,000 naira, what they call stomach infrastructure, which you will take, and then the only place you will go to is the toilet. And then 4 years again, they will come back and give you, So we need to begin to look at individuals, not just political parties or political platforms. Who are the individuals who have the character, the competence, the capacity, the track record of leadership to be entrusted with political power so that our conditions in Nigeria can change? This is, and only citizens can engage with this. The politicians themselves will not, they're not supposed to put themselves out of business. It is the citizen who should put a bad leader out of business. Remember that the government of Jonathan was defeated in 2015 because people were disappointed. The same way that people are also now disappointed very deeply because they invested so much hope in this government, that this government will change our lives, that this government will make Nigeria less corrupt. Instead, Transparency International has just come out with a report showing that corruption is increasing in Nigeria. And that's because corruption is just being used as a political football. The people are not serious about fighting corruption. If you're serious about fighting corruption, in this book, Big, I tell you how to really fight corruption. If the only people you feel you can hold accountable are political opponents, but when corruption is inside your own corner, you ignore it, or you don't do anything about it, you destroy the credibility of any fight against corruption that you claim to be waging. It will have no impact because everybody is seeing that it's not a balanced fight. Fair. It's not a fair fight against corruption. It's really a fight against some people who may or may not be corrupt. But, what about if So, for example, in Big and in my own vision of fighting corruption, if I were, for example, to be president of Nigeria, my fight against corruption will start from those who are closest to me. That is the way that you make people sit up.
Even others believe in the vision.
Others believe in what you're doing. You have to start from the people around you, because then people know, this is a really serious matter. We have to wake up, because if we step out of line, so there's credibility to what you're doing. That's what I believe.
Well, so you've announced that you'll be running for the post of the president of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Now, what makes you think you are capable, to lead this country and provide the needed leadership?
Nigeria needs three things. Nigeria needs healing. We need to heal Nigeria and build a nation. Nigeria needs economic transformation. Nigeria needs to restore its place in the world. In all our discussions, you have seen that my life has been along these three areas. I have rebuilt many broken societies at very senior levels of responsibility. I have managed the economy at a very senior level of responsibility. I have a lot of global exposure and networks around the world. And so I think that my experience and my training has prepared me, and my vision, most importantly, because you can have all this technical knowledge, without a vision, the people perish. So I have a vision for Nigeria, and I have the capacity to deliver that vision.
All right, as we wind up to a close, let me ask you what the Nigeria of your dream is, that Nigeria that you hope to wake up to see one day.
I dream of a Nigeria populated by a new tribe. The new tribe of Nigerians who are not focused on where you come from. They're not focused on whether you're Hausa, Yoruba, or Igbo. They're focused on the fact that we have a political identity as Nigerians and that we are committed to the progress of this country. I dream of a country that can meet its full potential based on the massive and abundant talent that we can see in this land and those of our compatriots who are abroad in the diaspora. I dream of a Nigerian in which a parent will not have to worry whether his child will get a job after graduating from school. I dream of a Nigeria where the mother can feed her children without worrying about where to get the next maize or the next rice. That's, in which poverty is made history, in which unemployment is massively reduced. That's the kind of Nigeria I dream about. I dream of a Nigeria in which Nigeria takes its rightful place under the sun as a giant of a country.
Well, I must say that's the Nigeria of my dream too.
Thank you.
So lastly, let me ask you one thing that you know about yourself that a lot of people do not know, but you would like to share today.
Wow, that is a tough question.
And that's my trick question.
Well, one thing I know about myself that people do not know is that I am a strategist to the core. When I dream, I don't just dream. I know how to execute. And so when I take on projects that seem very ambitious or very difficult, I have an ability to drive to success. So that's the difference between an idealist and an idealist pragmatist. I think I'm an idealist pragmatist. So I make things happen. I know how to get things done. It's not, so as I'm dreaming these dreams and having these visions, if I were to have the opportunity, I'll put them into practice because I know how.
Well, we have been speaking with former Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria. He is a political economist, lawyer, and former United Nations official. He was Professor of Practice in International Business and Public Policy at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University. Thank you again for coming on the program.
Thank you very much.
And thank you, viewers, for watching the show. Remember, you can keep up with us by sending your mails to the Sunday interview at tvcnews.tv. We'll be waiting to hear from you. Thanks again for watching. I'm Kelly Jadu. Bye for now.